Hi, I'm Charlie Delto, and this is my podcast. I'm something of an armchair philosopher, and I'm of the opinion that a lot of the world's problems right now are philosophical. Join me as we take a politically neutral look at some of the issues that plague our culture today. So grab a chair and turn your grey matter up to 10 as we discuss what everyone else is avoiding. Hi everybody, and welcome back to episode 4 of this podcast series that I'm doing on white male privilege. Since I recorded the last one, the world's talking about this a lot more with what's going on in America, so it's getting scarier and scarier to continue on with this subject. But anyway, I'm going to forge on. For those just catching up, I'm a white guy in Australia that's interested in philosophy, and I'm taking a look at this subject of white male privilege, critiquing it, not tearing it down, not building it up, just critiquing it. In the first episode, I did an intro, and I try to make the point that whatever this is metaphysical, that we're observing human structures or human culture here, and human structures and cultures can change once they know they're being watched and once they know that what people are seeing of their behavior will bring about reward or punishment. And we are trapped in this game, and I immediately started out as skeptical that we're ever going to get a good read on this. In the second episode, I took a look at Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, those 47 or 48 assertions. And then the last episode that I've just done, I really asked the question of what is it, and rather than try and define it, because obviously I'm in no position to be able to define it, rather I decided how would one know it? And I posited that the anecdotal method isn't any good because one swallow doesn't make a summer, and we're only going to listen to one group of people's voices over another on this one. I outlined the way in which universities or academics or sociologists might do a conclusive and rigorous examination of this, and I posited that I don't think that it's been done, but I suggested also that it would be a good thing to try and do a rigorous assessment of what things caused privilege from the point of view of race, and I made the point that racially we say that that white people live longer than black people, that white people make more money than black people, and a few other things like that, and then noted that women live longer than men but don't make as much money as men but have less chance of going to prison. And I wondered whether or not we were using the same tests for racial privilege as we were doing for gender privilege, or were we just picking and choosing whatever test we wanted from the feminine perspective or from the non-white perspective to bring around an outcome that we wanted. I then went to outline a few other ways of trying to understand it, and I think I concluded that it was going to be hard to ever do this rigorously and correctly. And then I listed a few things which makes me hugely skeptical that this has been done right or wrong. But regardless, we're going to forge forward here into the fourth episode as though we accept that white male privilege exists. Go back to the last episode and have a listen if you want to challenge that, but let's go forward as though it does. I've got a few problems with it. I think that it won't be entirely a good thing. I think that there are some mistakes that are being committed by invoking this idea, not necessarily of white male privilege, but just of privilege at all. The big problem with the notion of privilege at all is that it assumes a benefit, and I wonder how we came to define that benefit. In fact, I wonder if we are not being backdoored here with a meta-ethical definition of good that we've never asked for and don't want. So I want you to consider a coin toss right now, and imagine the coin comes down heads. At that point, we don't talk of good or bad luck. There is no luck involved yet. What's involved is chance. But if I said, I'll give you $100 if it comes down heads, and it does come down heads, then I might say, oh, you're very lucky. Now, I don't say, oh, chance. I say, oh, luck. Why luck? Because something is gained or lost now. Now, let's say I rolled a dice, and if 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 came up, I won $100, and if 6 came up, you won $100. Then we would say that I have privilege in the game, that the game is rigged to serve me. Just as a side note on that, I want to make the point that it may well be the case. This is controversial. I know this will upset a few people, and I'm not positing that this is necessarily true, but I want to make the point that if the dice was rolled 1, 2, 3, or 5 came up, I win. That seems unfair. But number one, if I invented the game. Number two, if I stumped up the cash, maybe it's not so unfair. The other person who gets the 6 receives some benefit or gets to play to a game where maybe they didn't stump up any cash, or maybe they didn't invent the game. I'm not saying that's how the world works. I'm just making a rational investigation into the nature of reality here, and it does seem to me that it's not, we need to go further than just say 2 people are playing the game to work out privilege on that one. The last thing I would say on that point, just as a side note, is that there may well be other people not playing the game. And so it might be better to be in the person that wins when a 6 comes up than being a person that doesn't get to play at all. But anyway, coming back to it, we understand that a privilege game is being played, and we can use the word privilege or luck because of the notion of the $100, that you get something out of it. What benefit is there in being white and being male? Let's take a look back at Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. And let's look at the first 4 privileges, as she put them. Number 1, I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. So the implied benefit there is that being around your race is good. And I said in the second episode, that's fucking racist. Number 2, I can avoid spending time with people whom I was trained to mistrust and who have learned to mistrust my kind or me. So the implied benefit here is being around trustworthy people. Number 3, should I need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing in an area where I can afford and in which I would want to live. So the implied benefit is living in the area you want to live in. You get the idea. You can see here that Peggy is assuming what the good life is, and she's taking it upon herself to do this for us all. Now, I would much rather a person come straight at me and say, what is good is to be around your own race. Now, I'm sure, I don't actually mean this, please don't do this, but hypothetically, in a thought experiment, if you went on Twitter tomorrow or went out in public tomorrow and said, what is good is to be around members of your own race, man, you would get fucking smashed. And so you should. That's a terrible thing to say. But I think if you went on Twitter tomorrow and said, I can, if I wish, to arrange to be around the company of people of my race most of the time, and that gives me privilege, a whole bunch of people would give you a like and a retweet. Those people hitting the like and retweet button, they're not clued in enough to realize that they've just condoned this unethical treatment. And I really feel in this idea of privilege, not necessarily white or male privilege, but just privilege, that we're not thinking hard enough about what these supposed goods are. Like, for example, if I said, if one person was born with one of those, I don't know, super fuel efficient electric cars, and one person was born owning a Mercedes-Benz, and we said, the person with the Mercedes-Benz have privilege. Dude, not necessarily. It's expensive to run, it runs on petrol, and you're completely negating the idea that having an environmentally friendly car is good. If someone said, you were born in Iceland, that's so lucky because of something like life expectancy or something like that, it's fucking cold in Iceland, there's more to consider about what is good in the world. And a lot of the people that are talking privilege are making these things up for us. And I don't want someone to rush a meta-ethical definition of good past me in some blur of activism. Let's look at point 21 in Peggy's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. Point 21, I am never asked to speak for all the people of my racial group. So it's good to speak without representing any group? I don't know what the answer is, but I can see what the implied benefit is in there, and I want to pause and think about that. Or point 24, I can be pretty sure that if I ask to talk to the person in charge, I will be facing a person of my race. So straight up, she's implying that to speak to someone else who's the same skin color of you is the natural good, or is the good life, or is an instance of the meta-ethical definition of good. Fuck off. I don't agree with that. No way. And I'm not letting this one get past me. I'm perfectly capable of speaking to an Asian person or an Aborigine person or a Mexican person or whoever it is, and it not being a bad situation. I'm very concerned about that. So I do think we are letting ourselves be backdoored with a concept of good we haven't asked for. Personally, if I find myself in a room with mostly white people, I am not going to apologize to the one Asian person in the room for their terrible, horrible predicament. Or when I travel through Asia or through, wherever I'm going, India, in the world, I don't expect them to manufacture white rooms, and I'm not going to go looking for white rooms. And if the hotel says, come stay where we're staying, mostly white people, I'm not going to go stay there because it's a good thing to do. I mean, why would I be traveling through India or China in the first place if my whole definition of what was good was being around people of my own race? I'd go and find a very white part of the city that I live in and go move there. Now, you probably think, I hope you're thinking at that point, oh, well, that's a fair point, but it's about to get a lot worse. If you're triggered by that bit, certainly don't listen any further and I won't be offended. But it gets a lot worse here. It's important to note that Peggy didn't say anyone, regardless of whatever race they are, when they are the minority race in the room, has it tough. If she had worded her article that way, it'd be so much better. But she said it's tough to be the one black person in a room full of white people. And so unfortunately, because of that, we have to go forward from there with the rational implications. And the rational implications is she's saying that she is saying that to be the one white person in a room full of black people or Asian people or whatever it is, isn't disadvantageous. And that, my friends, is fucked. It seems to be that when a white person walks into a room full of non-white people, it's like no problem at all. They're functioning at 100% and there's no disadvantage there in the slightest. But at the same time, she's saying if an Aborigine dude walks into a room full of white people, then the Aborigine dude's at a disadvantage. There's no way for me to go forward from this point without understanding that Peggy assumes that non-white people are not able to perform like white people is. And that is the very definition of racism. It is literally true. If I'm wrong, let me know, but I'm sure that's where this goes. I just want to double down on this. Saying that it's disadvantageous to be non-white in a room full of whites, but it's not disadvantageous to be white in a room full of non-whites, directly implies that white people can perform in all situations, but it's not the same for anyone else. Wah, 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 wah. I mean, that is such an own goal. That's really bad. Like, that's the big end. That's everything we don't want to go anywhere near. And not only has she written this article that implies the exact same thing, everyone seems to be buying into it. Am I losing my mind? Am I crazy? I mean, surely that's predicate within the article, that subject, that horrible subject that one thing is better than another. I mean, there's no way that this ends well. She's directly going at racial differences here. I mean, where the fuck are we going with this? These people hastily defining privilege for us all and inadvertently defining what is good and bad. I mean, they need to back up for a second, take a breath, and consider that might be making a serious mistake here. Look, I accept the notion of chance. There's some people are born one color, some people are born another, some people are born male, some people are born female, and the rest of it. To stretch that notion out into gender, say, oh my God, it's so terrible, she's born female. Don't you understand that that means when she's one woman in a group full of men, she's going to capitulate or she's going to just be slightly disadvantaged or whatever it is, and deny the argument that to be one man in a room full of women is the same. That is to say that men have privilege and women don't. I can't see any other way that being an absolute disaster for humanity. Look, I could bang on about that forever, and I have already a bit. I know, I'm sorry about that, but I feel that that's just such a massive point. There are other problems I have with it. I'm going to list them now. I won't spend as long on these ones. But number one, as we provide whatever it is, it's justice or it's restorative justice or it's resources to the female or inflict guilt or shame or some restriction upon the male based on this notion of privilege, we as a society enter a new quote unquote like game where having oppression or labeling another identity group as privileged can get you something. Embellishing or fabricating is bound to follow. Look at the Rolling Stone rape on campus thing with the, if you don't remember it, just Google it, Rolling Stone, a rape on campus, and read up about it. A lady completely made an utterly false sexual assault claim simply to get attention because she knew she would. So don't tell me that people don't lie or don't embellish or don't fabricate when they know they're going to get something out of it. Number two, we seem to be forcing people into race and gender-based tribes. Now, I know a lot of people that believe this say, fuck it, we're there anyway. If you're born Aborigine in Australia, you're forced into a certain racial category already. So I'm prepared to accept that I might be wrong on that one. Do we really need to identify everyone at school and tell them, force them to understand, dude, 10-year-old, you're white, you really are. And they might work that out in their 30s or something anyway. But do we really need to institutionalize this? And I know the reason that people are saying you're white is to apply white guilt to them, but consider that might go the other way as well. Number three, I'm worried that there will be instances of strong privilege in certain contexts, as there might be in certain parts of US cities. And as we're seeing playing out on TV right now, it certainly does believe to be that there are some problems there. But I worry that will then be rolled out across the whole Western world as though it's like a one-size-fits-all deal, that it might not be like that everywhere. It isn't like that everywhere. It might even be that there are contexts in which males have less privilege than females. Like in Russia, men live like 10 years less than women in Russia, but that's only in Russia. And then I know in India and China, there's way more men than there are women because of the two different sort of socially constructed disadvantages of having daughters in those societies. Well, not so much in China anymore, but it was for a long time in China. But there's way more women in Russia than there are men, and there's way more men in China and India than there are women. Like, it's not the world isn't one size fits all. 4, I'm similarly worried that certain historical context will prevent us from discussing present day context. We might be stuck in the past, and the past is important. We should never forget our past. But I worry that we'll dwell in a historical context that better illustrates the point of privilege than exists now. Like, I saw a guy today. He was a young African-American guy, and he was saying some really good stats about how well things have improved. He was saying that the incidence of young African-American males being imprisoned has halved in the last, I don't know what it was, 10 or 20 years or something, I can't remember. And also that, like, the number of unarmed people killed in California like 30 years ago was like 100 people in a year, and it's down to like 2 or something like that. It's easy to try and you'll see people do this, go back years and years and years and years until they find the stat that most supports their argument. But we should be here and now today. In the same vein, I worry that some parts of history will be erased to win the game too. White America and white Britain, or America and Britain, I think you just say, were involved, or at least America was involved in the slave trade, but they also ended it. And the British Navy enforced the end of slave trading, including blowing slave ships out. Well, I don't think they did. I think they boarded slave ships, freed the slaves, and took them back to wherever they came from. I've got huge problems with celebrities admitting their white privilege and having absolutely nothing to do after doing it. Like, they just say it and then they get movie roles. They say it and then everyone loves them, and they don't actually atone and they don't actually repent. It's just a line. You just say, I have white privilege, and then you lap up the affection heaped upon you. But as they do this, they fuck the rest of us over, and some poor white trash working class kid gets his ass kicked the next day at school. I don't know if the celebrities really thought about it. It's just something that their managers told them to do, perhaps. So that's the end of this podcast today. As this is being recorded, and it'll go to air in a few weeks' time, I know, it's now become really dangerous to talk about this sort of thing. I feel as though it's incumbent upon me to say, when I started this out, I didn't know it would be this controversial. And so the context of this has changed heaps just in this time. But I'm going to keep doing this. I hope it goes well. It's meant in good faith. So hit like, subscribe, or follow, or whatever your podcast device prompts you to do right now. And bear with me as we try and get through this. Thanks, guys.